Welcome to the first New Book News reading of 2021, celebrating writers whose books were published during the pandemic lockdown. My name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a literary arts nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. We have programs for writers, readers, and storytellers. And I'd like to invite you to a discussion on the short story collection, The Thing Around Your Neck, by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Wednesday, January 13th. More information is at lityoungstown.org. And thank you for joining us. I'm so pleased to feature these three poets tonight, and congratulations to them on their incredible books. We'll follow this evening's readings with a conversation about these new books. Tina Kelley is the author of Abloom Awry, Precise, and the Gospel of Galore, which won the Washington State Book Award. She co-authored Almost Home, Helping Kids Move from Homelessness to Hope. She and her husband have 2 children and live in Maplewood, New Jersey. And her new book is Rise Wildly, published by CavanKerry Press. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to start at the beginning with the first poem. I'm in the mood for cheerful poems today. I have a lot of poems in this collection about the death of my mother, but I'm going to start cheerful, and I'm probably going to keep cheerful. It's been a long week. I wish you had known when you launched me how I loved my home pond, its aerated, bleachy smell, the beach leaves around it, the skating, picnics, scout ceremonies, my kids visiting now, how I would feel at home in the sky, climbing high hills, seeing bluegrass like tails of galloping horses slowed down, like cirrus clouds sped up. I wish you could know I buckled up every single time, fell for a Moreau painting called The Diamond Smiles at Twilight, never walked into a bar alone. Could you guess I'd marry the kind of man who shared, who gave great advice on what car to buy? Did you have any idea I'd have a kid who'd say, do you think I shouldn't like you as much as I do, being a teenager and all? I hope you could hope that, yes, I was meticulously raised, that a friend would call me serene, that I got so old my scars faded, and I learned of 100,000 undersea mountains, only 1,000 of them named. Did the smallest thought of yours guess how very much I would love it here? And the next one I'd like to read is also from the first section. It's called Getting Through the A's in Angels, Their Names and Meanings. And this was a research poem. I had run across a website that discussed all the different names of angels, and I probably could have gotten 26 poems out of it, but I think they've taken it down since. There are angels for inserting the soul into the body at birth, angels who invented carousels and all the new French fashions. There's one just for the 26th of each month for honey, sexuality. Eban is your guardian 10 months before death. Another protects 5th children. In heaven's meadows upon meadows, one angel governs confusion. One does nothing at all till Armageddon. One rules warm winds. The keeper of fiery triplicities seduces the regent of Wednesdays, and they're all new every morning, born through every God breath, created by each fresh human sin. They crochet cotton breasts for cancer survivors, telling corny jokes. They feather insights to the board, quietly advise on paint colors. One's pregnant with death, one protects kinglets, but none felt like mine until I spotted a green sea turtle, blunt and kindly, slowly lifting its arms in hosannas to the quicksilver surface shining down. I'd like to read one that feels like a journalism poem. A lot of my inspiration in previous books had come from my work at the New York Times as a general assignment reporter, when I would run around the world all day long, meeting people that regular people don't get a chance to meet. And I ran a hyperlocal blog for my town and met a man named Gus, who was a writer and wrote a little column for us about growing old. So we became friends. And I have a poem in gratitude for Gus Lindquist, 86, an artist in town. That's the epigraph. And the title is, I'm Having the Death I'd Always Hoped For. But it's not a gloomy poem. So anyway, his voice from intensive care sounded chipper, very much his. Hey, I'm pulling the plug today. I inhaled, asked if he wanted a visit. I had to get my son from school first. Gus would try to last that long. At the hospital, I found him comfortable, curious, fascinated, unafraid of earplug silence, darkness, focused on creativity, diversity, love. He wanted the young doctor's company, told her, after a few calls and emails on his to-do list, to please stop dialysis. It would take a day. He wouldn't suffer. I stayed an hour, kissed Gus goodbye. The cheek was cold. Walking down the hall, I didn't crumble, off to my son's soccer game somehow. By next morning, his heart slowed to done. I couldn't say rest in peace. In an ancient ritual he knew, one shines light on the other's head, heart, and hands. Rest in light. I'd like to read the one that the title comes from. The title of the collection is Rise Wildly. This was a headline that I read in the New York Times. It said, trains running after storms. And I took it very literal-mindedly and thought about what it would be like if all the trains across the country started running after the storms as they receded. I had to commit flight. I had seen too many birds escaping, flying off to the sides, as if I were evil. In the east, the rumbling called to me, kept ahead of me, vanished. I rose and laughed. Be confident, the other trains told me. Rise wildly. I saw a star that appeared for only a second, then another star, then another, short, fast stars. All far more complex than we had imagined. The sky, the flat land, the fields. There is so much more of everything, like daybreak in a house you knew first at night. In one car, everyone had the same name, all the Yolanda Schmidts on the planet at once. I saw meteors all day behind the sunlight. Yolanda, age 9, wanted to know what never mind really means. The fields near Spokane looked like lily pads, green circles of irrigation systems. The last train followed the last engine, like the flung back droop of Columbine spurs, triumphant. We were magnificent. We're in the castle of the angels, the 5-year-old Yolanda hollered. You know the look of the small plane flying beneath the big plane, that sliding lack of control? Perhaps this is a forever nightstand, the 37-year-old Yolanda thought, pondering what had happened very early this morning. Have you ever seen a bee land on a bud and both fall fast to the ground? When we land, there's a tunnel in the moon. This one is a poem that changed quite a bit in the revisions. It almost ended up in the cutting room floor, but I changed the genders around and then I liked it a whole lot better. Her thoughts that October. She wanted to paint his portrait, an ultimate gift of attention. She wanted to paint how he looked to himself in the shiny panel of elevator buttons, how he looked to himself in the glass over the clay at the Modern, how he looked to himself in the water fountain chrome as he drank. She wanted to paint him from the neck down, waiting, holding one elbow, all housewifely in the dryer window. She wanted to paint this man on hold and his factual look as they cut his hair, his sweet courage giving blood. She wanted to paint his eyes done crying, red-rimmed, green, to paint what she saw during their kiss, his self become one light point. Then she would teach him to paint himself. The portrait would show his increasing satisfaction as the resemblance grew. He would have to keep changing it. While he worked, she painted him, touching the paintbrush to a mirror, including there the ever-present shadow of her nose. So do I have time for one more, Karen? Okay, thanks. I'm gonna go to the end and to the last poem. And it is called To Live, the Imperative. And it has this great epigraph from a book called Darwin, God, and the Meaning of Life by Steve Stuart Smith. The epigraph goes, for all we know, though, ours may be the only planet in the universe hosting mind and consciousness. If so, then our decisions and our conduct will determine whether the universe has a long future as a conscious entity or will soon lapse back into unconsciousness. So it's called To Live, the Imperative. There is a German verb to separate souls from bodies. How terrifying, the world without the two bright lights in our live, kind eyes. Instead, a radiant glacier melts to black stone. Maybe the universe reads all our email, understands our jokes and work, and loves our steel drums. 99% of all the species that ever lived are now extinct. We counter with side curtain airbags, programs to maintain brain health, surefire weight loss diets. A language dies every 14 days. We bash ourselves upstream, scraping flesh to find a mate. Could you live in a world without fish? What if fireflies stop blinking? What does the sperm feel when it wins? I praise the headlong from love to egg and life. 40% of all humans ever died in their first year. Each age loses sleep over air raids, 1984, Russia, Cuba, nuclear war, climate change, 2012, North Korea. A quarter of our daughters are depressed or anxious. The person I loved most in the world went to solitude. He lives outside my tenses. By now, you have felt this too. This is what hearing a hovering helicopter does to me. There are stars so far away, their first light has not yet reached us. We must remain the only ones to know and praise them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Alice Freeman is the author of 7 poetry collections, including The View from Saturn and Vinculum, for which she won the 2012 Georgia Author of the Year Award in Poetry, a recipient of 2 Pushcart Prizes, and included in Best American Poetry. She lives in Milledgeville, Georgia. Her new book is Blood Weather, published by LSU Press. Welcome, Alice. You'll have to unmute, Alice.
Okay. Once upon a time, I tell about a tour group traveling in a foreign country and of the woman who at a rest stop went inside to change her clothes. When she returned to the bus, where's the lady in the pink shirt? So a search party was formed and she joined in, searching for herself. Not metaphorically, as those words imply, Thoreau deep in Walden Woods, seeing himself in the soarings of a hawk, but actually, the way startled, you glimpse in a passing mirror yourself as stranger, an old lady wearing hurt on her face like an abandoned child. The question is, did she find herself? Or did someone else suddenly turn and say, you're it, you, the person everyone's looking for? Isn't that what we all want? To be the person everyone's looking for? Strapped in our seats, the bus stinking of diesel, heading north, south, anywhere, and for once given a chance to claim a life of shining achievement just by changing a pink shirt to blue. Mother Teresa, Madame Curie, why I could be Emily Dickinson in a white dress, having stuffed my green sweatshirt with the stained sleeves in a trash bin 60 miles east of Toledo. From the Book of Accounts, I speak of work, how he'd come home coughing wet and loose in the chest from the Chesterfields, the hauling of bundles. How he'd stumble to the sofa, long underwear drooping at the seat, flop down, snoring before his head hit the armrest. 7 o'clock and blotto as a burnt out bulb, while across the room far into the night, mother and I for her sake played cards, shuffled and dealt, shuffled and dealt. So much thin-lipped work it took to arrange and rearrange the hand she'd been given. So much work to have to pick up every morning the death card of hard labor that any cut deck eventually lays bare. All those hours of heavy lifting to gather, dole out, and try again. Draw and discard, amid grunts from the sofa, troubled dreams and fortunes shuffle. Night after night, the long march of deuces and kings, 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, any kind, before she'd finally get up to shake his shoulder and walk him to bed, while I'd wait for her to come back, sit down, and tally up the points. This is a poem about my mother-in-law. Her name was Daisy, asking forgiveness for Bruce, that's my husband, my sweet young thing. When we cleaned out Daisy's house, dragging 126 black bags to the curb. When you packed up the basement and garage while I opened her top dresser drawer to fold gently, gently, what no mere daughter-in-law has rights to. Then suddenly, because how could she be gone? I saw her hands again, patting her fresh from the beauty parlor hair. The same style as in the photos taken when she was 20. Photos found in a shoebox stuffed with letters from her Robert and the war. Photos you spread out on all the little tables at the viewing, passing them among the guests. See what she was? While she, in her travel clothes, lay among us, oblivious for the first and only time to the choke of your sorrow. What could I do to save you? Having myself to beg pardon for. I stood by her box and sliding my hand in to finger the white collar of her dress, asked forgiveness, for I had taken in my two rough hands the forbidden of another, the cotton crotched, the lace trimmed, the cupped, the pink and final nightgown, the delicates worn and warmed by her, the crushables that clung to her fragile comforts, her son. I have a friend who's a cowboy, a real cowboy, and he sends me information about cows. So this is called Dumped at Heaven's Gate. When a hurricane spirals down, spinning like an unhooked tongue, shrieking in the wind's wet mouth, beheading trees and cracking open the sky, pregnant cows in the fields let down their calves. Whether the cause is barometric pressure or the trauma of a bovine nightmare, the legs buckle and the great spasms of the uterine walls begin. All day and into the night, hit by a fury of flying leaves and limbs, she labors, a 1,500-pound bellow nailed to the spot. All the world's misery concentrated in that heaving flesh, that drenched monolith of quiver and rolling eyes. And if, in the wind's howl and rain, her warm, slick package manages to slip out and live, and she, remembering to turn her head and lick it clean, blinks to find it next morning wobbling on first legs, that too is Easter. I'm looking at the time up there. I don't know if you remember the old song Deep Purple. When the deep purple falls. I love that song. Anyway, this is about a friend of mine who loves the color purple. Deep purple. Monday, and today's job is cleanup. I'm humming an old song to keep me company, something about purple and a garden wall. The children are concerned, for it was only yesterday I measured out my future, stretching greedy big as open arms could reach. Now here I am backsliding into old lyrics. I'm reminded of a woman I once knew who loved purple, not lavender, that sickly excuse, but deep purple. She wore it, painted the inside of her house with it, her lips, her nails, the bottom of her pool, where she'd spend long afternoons floating in tinted water. She claimed she didn't know the song, neither words nor tune, written before her time, but there, behind her eyes, behind her studied cheerfulness, it must have existed. Not the doo-wop version that ruined it, but the old one that a patched up woman might have a need for. I know this has little to do with cleaning, except to say her house was spotless, not a thing out of place, as if she spent each morning shoving back in a back closet too deep for any rag to reach a memory. I want to think it was about love, about a cherished someone sucked prematurely out of this world, draining away like a slow twilight into the ground, a lingering subtraction that left her lost, wandering in deep purple, nightshade, and sorrow. I spent some time in Alaska and, well, anyway, Mirage. Across Kachemak Bay, black mountains rise like judgment, towering above the inlet. Black streaked with snow, black, white, nothing in between. When suddenly, like a phantom floating across the water, a fishing boat chugs past. And there we are again, steaming out of Freeport with Captain Charlie, little family bundled up against the cold. And it must be close to noon, for there's Mother doling out the egg salad sandwiches loaded with lettuce for health and green good fortune. The bay, too, a green bounty, crowned by white flashes of gulls skimming low over the stern to eye what the wake churned up. And look, there at the rail, chumming for fish, that's my father, roaring his smutty songs with Mother laughing because they were in the open air and free to let themselves be. Oh, dare I say it, happy. What difference if the fluke or flounder weren't biting? For wasn't it fluke enough, their being at peace for just this once? On the scales of judgment, shouldn't that day, snatched from the angry current of the rest, count? Add up to something? That day when the gulls weighed in, balancing the light on their wings? Oops. And I've got 3 minutes to end, and I want to end on a funny one, because I write funny poems sometimes. Laugh, clown, laugh, you know. This is called Playing Favorites. You ask how I feel about my body, my parts. When I was young, I loved my legs. Ah, the places they carried me. Long legs, lovely legs. How I'd fling them about, wrap them around, don't ask. Later, I favored my teeth, especially after I almost lost them, hitting my face on the steering wheel, seeing stars. Of course, there's the ongoing affair with hair. Who's not guilty of that? But now, as I'm getting on in years, I admit a certain fondness for my belly. I call her my cheese. Such a comfort, so easy to maintain, no plastic wrap or refrigeration necessary. Notice I do not speak of insides, which tend to monitor themselves, only my outer delineations, which I'm proud to say are immortalized in art. The Louvre, the Uffizi, the National Gallery, in niches or blazing from the wall, Venuses, Graces, Muses, bolder girls fattened on glory. Wear sunglasses. Stand in front of any one of Rubens' hefty beauties, proud of her dimpled cellulose and pudding flesh, and see, front and center, in all her excess, my belly. That gurgling pillow, that buttoned happiness, creamy soft, homegrown and spongy, my big mozzarella. I tell you, I could bend myself, and if I could bend myself in half, I'd eat me for lunch with a slice of tomato on a hunk of focaccia or good French bread.
Well, thank you so much. I love that.
Thank you. I just dropped them all on the floor.
Stephanie Strickland's 10 books of poetry include Ringing the Changes, a code-generated project for print based on the ancient art of tower bell ringing. Others include The Red Virgin, a poem of Simone Weil, and 12 collaborative digital poems. Her new book is How the Universe is Made, published by Asada Press. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for gathering us together. Paul Celan said, I cannot see any basic difference between a handshake and a poem. This is my handshake, a poem about my city, my daughter, and my grandmother. 1. It's called Introductions. 1. I live in a splendid city, capital of capital, ruinful, ruinous, ruin us, New York. Plastered, painted, dripping with myopic gold at dawn. Rivers of tall glass gold, even with my glasses on. Green carbon footprint, an imperial minim. Sky spectrum at sunset, ravishing, toxin-induced, blue, fumous, purple. 2. I am as alone as survival permits. Not at all, and quite a bit. Only my afflicted daughter more so. Hidden in a land of flaunted wealth, organ rebellion, no sight safe. Neural paroxysms gag on water, choke on air. Biointegrity fails to adapt. Extended care. 3. Fey folk, wee sprites inside Lily of the Valley, cordoned by the garage on the way to the back alley, beneath the raised screen porch, stopping the jalopy with built-up petals to discover garnets, grenadine, black currant eyes in a swirl upon twirl of lace, Queen Anne's in a meadow. Oh, of course, not a meadow. Some backlot, some abandoned weed field. No one liked it then, but she and me, the aimless caravanning, elvishness, still alive. In this poem, I retrieve a history from the 19th century Amistad slave ship rebellion. Then as now, to be human means to do so in a world of institutions and laws and norms, all at risk of becoming unjust if not re-examined, reinterpreted, and cared for with vigilance. The title begins with the Latin phrase jus suum, which names a Greek principle of justice, to render everyone his due. Jus suum, what can never be taken. Josiah Willard Gibbs, 1790 to 1861. That the question can be tolerated, whether they be free men, for a single moment, Gibbs said. Josiah Willard, the elder professor at Yale of sacred books. Language is a cast of the human mind, Gibbs elder said, visiting the jail in 1839 to give theirs back to them on our soil, transcribing sounds for words, for numbers told to him from behind their bars when he held up his fingers, 1, 2, 5, 10, then traveling to New York by stagecoach, ship, to the port, to seek and find on a British brig someone who spoke Mende and English, that African men, Black mutineers, might claim their right, should they have had to, inalienable in an American court, convened in Connecticut, New Haven, where the slave ship was tied up. Our courts, he said, the shame to our courts, that the question could be tolerated, whether they be freemen regaining their freedom or criminals or property for a single moment. So I appreciate that the other poets have wanted to lighten the atmosphere this week, but for me, we are grieving in 2020 and 2021. We have lost more souls than were lost in Vietnam 5 times over. This poem is called Keeping Company with You, Coma, for my father. The gills still swimming with you, breathing for you, tumbling backward toward some future, shallow breath, a passing shiver, your dream of light, knowing no other time, moves inside rocking shadow of water, as if someone still stood on the broken patio, haggling for hours, the price of a pool lamp, its broken cord. I would like to remember Liesl Muller, who died on February 21st, 2020, at age 96. She selected my book about Simone Weil, The Red Virgin, for the Brittingham Prize. And I was surprised to discover that she was, at that time, nearly blind, and all the manuscripts were read to her by her husband. Here is a poem from that book. Soul learns everything from body. The bird forgets, but the trap does not. Cassandran, her harsh voice worrying, probing, if any human being show need of any other, a little or a lot, why does the latter run away? I have much experience on one side or the other. Everything from the body. A boy running down the field can read so well, his hands are unimpeded, have already caught the pass, reached out before he saw. Finally, not to read at all, hands alone fly up, whole body shaping the air, weaned, immediate. The soul learns turning, inclination, fatigue, to be worn down. The body unastonished by reduction. It feels what can be shown, that there exist remarkable leafless trees of blossom, tiny back and forth of almond, long touched wands of pink that shudder down their whole length and are blown to the pavement almost at once. And I'll finish with a poem about breathing. Excuse me. It's called My Mother's Body. Moved through like a dune, become the sweep of a palm through sand. My mother's body became like sand, breached, a memory of outline. Her lungs fill with water, a hull overturned, sails filling with water, toss, stiffen in the sunlight. Again, submerge. breath at long intervals, needle flow of bubbles in the respirator, pure oxygen forced through her mouth, drying her lips. Look, I've bought gloss, pomade. I know you don't want smell. No, this has no scent, no color, only her eyebrows. Don't wash off my eyebrows, she says. They are like wings of soft brown powder that go nowhere, stopped at the arch in flight. This room crowds her so. Even its light, I push back the flowers. She loves my father. She opens her arms as if the tubes and bandages and wires were Titania's cape in the moonlight. Tell me about writing. But I could not tell her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I really look forward to this conversation. Tina, would you be willing to start us off?
Sure. Can you hear me? Stephanie, I'm fascinated by your treatment of death, and especially the loss of your mother, which is something I wrote about in my book as well. How do you approach that topic? How do you sit down and write about it? How do you, I mean, for me, I questioned whether I should put those first or in the middle of the book, because they weren't the whole book for me, and I didn't know if I would push people away with them or draw people in. How do you make that calculation?
That poem was, it's my book is a selected, new and selected poem. You know, it covers a lot of different books, and that happened a long time ago that my mother died. And at the time, I was writing a lot about the body. Give the Body Back was my first book, and then so it was a natural thing. Everything was about the body in some way, and this was. I think that's the way I approached it. That it was most present to me about that. Later on in the Simone book, there's Simone Weil is often considered, although I disagree with this, to have committed a kind of suicide by starvation, which I think was a political act that she undertook. But then the contrast of this, I mean, how I reacted to this woman's death, who became very important to me after my mother died. I became very, very immersed, and I still am really. But the difference between that death and my mother's death and how I responded to them, it was interesting because I was also interested in women's relationships to other women.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Do I get to ask her a question now? Or so you have several poems where you inhabit the dead, or a train rising to the moon. And then in the last section, you explore your own potential absence. Not a persona, it's a very, and I wondered if you could talk about that arc.
Well, they didn't flow chronologically so much as they fell according to the way the poems wanted to be ordered. But are you talking about the one where I'm playing hide and seek and pretending no one finds me?
Well, there's a lot of them where you aren't really seen or known by the people around, by the other people, other individuals. It's not your death exactly, but it's your absence, in a particular way.
Right. I wonder if it comes, and I think I have several others that aren't in this collection that meet the same criteria. I think it has to do with being a narrator for a living. I think as a journalist, I'm supposed to be pretty invisible. I'm not supposed to have the first person there. And I think all poems are about love or death or both. And I think a lot of mine spend a lot of time contemplating absence and death. But I think there's definitely that narrator who's supposed to be invisible in the telling of the tale.
Can I ask Alice a question?
Go ahead.
Now you didn't read, your book is called Blood Weather, and it's just a lot of blood in it. And you didn't really read those poems so much. To me, your book is kind of haven for those who are targeted. And I enjoyed the reversals that, you're angry at the trap that Lady Macbeth is placed in, and Judith and Clytemnestra. You do a lot of reversals of the ordinary understanding there. But then you broaden the view to an indictment of our collective or civic wrongs. And can you talk about widening your view in that way? I'm thinking particularly of the Holocaust poem.
Well, okay, but first I want to tell you about the murder poems. Those 3 poems were written together, even though they're not together in the book, but they were written together. And they were written, I don't want to get political, but I'm going to get political.
Good.
After the election, I was in a terrible state. I mean, I was so depressed. And they just came pouring out, all together. Because I'm sort of like on their side. I'm all on their side. And I realized months later that it was because of the election. I mean, I was looking around for murder. I'm a very gentle person. As far as your question goes, how it broadened out into, say it again?
Well, our collective or civic wrongs, in other words, instead of just fictional people or historic figures,
Right. Well, those historic figures are very personal to me. And I don't know if I can draw a line between what I've read and taught for years and experienced personally.
I'm thinking of the children on the French playground, and being sent off, right? So right. I think it struck me as we all know the fictional figures, right? Are pretty much, so they're right. So well known. And we can understand that. We can understand the reversal there. But it's a completely different move that you make when you ask us to imagine the situation of these children, or the caretakers for these children, or the children who weren't allowed to be in that playground when your children were, and so forth.
Right. I don't know if I can answer that truthfully. Okay. I don't know if I can.
Why don't you ask someone a question?
Oh, okay, I'll ask. Let's see. I got all these questions here, and I've been reading your bell ringing book.
Yes.
So, but I would like to ask Tina a question. I got all these notes. Your book is filled with light. Even in the dark poems, they just lift up. They're filled with light. I want to know where I can buy that. Where I can buy that bottle. I think that the poems that one writes, are a reflection of who you are. That that it's not a choice. That your what they call voice is really the deepest part of you. And I'm sorry, this is the only book that I've read. And is it just this book? But even when it's dark, even when you've got some wonderful, wonderful, dark, dark lines, you just bring us back. You just lift us up. You do that on purpose?
I think it's sort of like you were saying, an introduction. A poem is a handshake, an introduction, and I think that's kind of who I am. My best friend calls me Pollyanna Candy Pants because I always put a sort of a brighter spin on, I have a bright side. It's annoying to a lot of people in my house, but I do find the light in a lot of situations. And I think part of it, my last book was Abloom Awry, and it was about kind of the glory of how awful and horrible our planet and life on our planet can be, and how glorious as well. And that contrast always just awes me. Like when I hear from covering the news some terrible incident that was, if a novelist had created it, you never would have believed it. But that the universe or God or whoever's running the show here has just such an amazing way of forming plots and horriblenesses as well as glorious things. And I'm fascinated by that. And I think some of it was just, the first poem touches on that. The one that I read touches on having been adopted at birth and landing in a really, really wonderful, pleasant family, and how I had a sense of luck over that that spread for years.
I envy you.
It's so great because it's so opposite most of the adoption books that you read. Most of the books and poems about adoption that you read.
Yeah, and I often feel very freakish about that. I mean, when I've written articles about adoption and have some poems about it, and friends who think, oh, you're just repressing it, but it's not. It was a very good institution for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, bless you.
Thank you.
Let's see, I've got questions here.
Alice, I was just so taken with your one about labor and how seldom we see in poetry what manual labor does to a person. And I thought that was just so rare and incredibly well done.
Thank you. Thank you. And my mother, who had to lift it all. I mean, how did she live through it? I don't know.
Yeah.
They were miserable. They were.
We got that.
Miserable. You know.
Except for that one moment. I love
that one day.
Yeah.
That one day, maybe that would have been good.
Alice, you asked, what does a woman feel who gives herself permission to test the dark depths of what she is? Mm-hmm. And so there's three answers I kind of heard in the book. One was be very afraid. Mm-hmm. One was last chance. Mm-hmm. And one was, I know who I am. I know with whom I belong. Mm-hmm. And I want to know, are there other answers that I missed or that you're still seeking? In the account of the woman who's kind of locked in by her caretaker or partner, I'm not sure who, she forms a kind of alliance with the leaves, with the natural world, and is that an answer to that same question? Or I just wondered, is there more? It's a very, very profound question. I just wondered where all.
I don't know if that's a good way to organize a book, by the way, which I'm always looking for. To answer the questions like that. The question about the woman with the leaves is, I said to my husband one day that I think I'm going cuckoo. And he said, oh, stop it. You're the sanest person I know. And I said, no, I think I'm going cuckoo. And then I thought, what if I was going cuckoo? What would it be like? this house that we live in is we're in a forest, and we're surrounded by leaves. And so it's just, well, to me, that's what poetry is. It's just pushing the envelope, taking a thought. Well, I think it is with both of you too. Taking a thought and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and seeing where it will go. No? Yeah. I've got a good question here someplace for Stephanie. Do you have an ideal audience in mind as you write? Or after you finish writing a piece, who are you writing to? Who is the ideal audience?
First of all, me. No, I don't write for an audience, except that I'm aware of audience in the sense that I do such different kinds of work. Mm-hmm. For instance, the bringing the changes thing. To present that book, which was a computer-generated book, but it's a print book, I had to submit a paper to a mathematical convention where it was taken to be accepted. I had to make an interactive version of it so that it could go into climates of change exhibition that was being held at a conference. I had to get it reviewed as a print book. I did some interviews where I talk about how it was constructed. And now some of the people who do a lot with electronic literature, they'll be more interested in that part of it, and other people be much more interested in who the voices that were sampled are. And other people will be more interested in how we got the code and what the history of the code is and everything. And those audiences really don't overlap all that much, except at my desk, or whatever, right? So it's kind of a lost game to try and, you know what I mean? It's just in my mind that they need to come together, and I've loved bells for so long, and it only recently struck me that one of the reasons, so the bell ringing, these guys in 17th century would go in England, would go to the bell towers, and they would have these marathon bell ringing sessions according to very strict rules, which turned out to be strict mathematical rules, and they would spot each other for drinks. I mean, it was a game. If you messed up, you bought drinks for the other guys if you messed up the pattern, right? And I said, what is that? Why is that happening in the church, right? And then it struck me that it's happening in the church because Henry VIII got rid of all the, all the Catholic churches were ended at a stroke, right? And so they had a much different relation to the community, and people still were attached to them, but the other things could happen in them because, sort of like now, the church soon got hold of it again, that didn't go on like that. But I didn't even ask that question, right? For so long, and you would think it was a natural question or whatever, I don't know. So I'm not sure that there's not an audience, except I think I like people who like to listen to poems, who like to hear them read.
What about you?
Sorry?
Tina, what about you?
Oh,
who's the audience?
The audience is kind of like the New York Times audience. I think when I'm writing a poem, I am trying to be clear and engaging, and I think of it as a lead and a kicker. I totally don't think of it as written towards an 8th grade vocabulary, as most newspapers are, because I adore large words. But I want to bring in the person who doesn't want to be pushed away by poems. And I really hate being pushed away by abstractions and difficult things to read as a consumer of poetry. So I think when I'm writing, I'm trying to make sure that I'm kind of not educating, but sharing some of the strange little bits of knowledge I've collected over the years. I do a lot of research for poems sometimes, but I definitely think of it in the same mindset of what my day job is, which is writing nonfiction.
Well, you succeed.
Oh, thank you.
Those are great answers. Alice, would you like to bring us all back around with your ideal audience
I write for the Muse.
for the meeting?
I write for the Muse, and she's damn tough. And I say to her, look, I've rewritten this thing 86 times, and she gives me a crack across the face. She says, sorry, it's not good enough. So what if you've spent a month on it? It's not good enough. So I don't know, I call it the Muse, whatever it is. Yeah, that's who I write to. She's tough.
Harsh mistress. Well, thank you all so very much. I'm very grateful, and I enjoyed this time with you immensely.
Well, it was wonderful. Thank
Yes, thank you so much.
Here,
you.
here's to this year brightening in some really important ways.